The sky over the Pacific lit up as though a second dawn had broken, and the people of Earth saw the first lines of alien ships crawl across the horizon. The feeds from orbital monitors confirmed what every eye already feared. There were not hundreds, and not thousands, but 9,900 warships entering orbit. They came in long, precise lines like a wall of steel, stretching from one edge of the atmosphere to the other, and they believed the sight of their mass would break the courage of a young world, but Earth was watching and Earth was waiting. In the orbital command ring, Commander Amina Rao stood with her hands locked behind her back. Her face was calm, but her pulse beat heavy because she knew the truth. The invaders had come, prepared with weapons strong enough to burn oceans and armies enough to cover continents, yet she also knew the strength of her people and the hidden teeth of her planet. For one moment she let her eyes drift to the curve of the Earth below, where blue seas and green lands curved gently beneath the thin white clouds. It was not just a planet to her, it was her home, and she would fight for it with everything she had. She raised her voice and ordered the activation of Phase Ash, A, and the command ring moved into a faster rhythm. Satellites woke up in silent bands around the world. They changed their signals and faces to lie to the enemy, creating hundreds of ghost ships and phantom fleets. Reflectors drifted high into the winds, turning harmless balloons into bright false targets. The alien scans returned a broken picture of Earth filled with storms of energy and scattered shadows that confused even their most advanced systems. For a moment, their advance slowed as their commanders worked to untangle the mess on the flagship of the Ninth Spear. An alien strategist named Kelvor leaned over the glowing pool of tactical icons. He had studied the human race through stolen reports from frontier colonies. The word that appeared too often was improvisation. He had laughed at the idea that a species barely out of its cradle could surprise an empire older than their oldest ruins. Yet as he watched the mess on his screen, he felt a small ripple of unease. He ordered a test. A column of destroyers was sent forward to cut through the noise and strike at what appeared to be a weak point. The destroyers met a storm of guided metal hidden in the night side of the planet. The trap had been waiting. Canisters burst in silence, releasing clouds of fragments that moved like schools of fish. Each piece listened for heat and motion, then darted toward its prey. The destroyers burned engines and fired blindly into the storm, but every dodge opened them to another strike. One by one, they were torn apart and the wrecks tumbled down toward the atmosphere, leaving streaks of fire across the sky. Kelvor sat back in silence, learning his first lesson about Earth on the command ring. Amina did not cheer. She nodded once and ordered the ring to hold fire. Let them think, she said, let them see that not every opening was weakness. She walked across the bridge, touching the shoulders of her officers, grounding them, reminding them that they stood together. Her calm voice carried across the world net as she ordered live feeds of the battle sent to every shelter and school. She knew the people needed to see with their own eyes that resistance had begun. In one shelter in Karachi, a nurse named Yusuf stood with 100 children. The screen above their heads showed the alien wall stretching across the sky, and for a moment the children trembled. Yusuf told them a story of storms he had seen as a boy. He said the sea always looks too big until you remember that courage can be bigger. One child smiled, and that smile spread through the room like a flame, and the fear eased. The people of Earth were not collapsing. They were waiting for their chance. Then the first open transmission went out to the alien armada. Amina's voice spoke across the void. You come to conquer Earth, she said. State your claim, your grievance or your need, and we will answer. Her words were calm, but behind them was a steel that every listener could hear. When Kelvor replied, he spoke of ancient rights and the duty of old stars to harvest young worlds. His words were cold, rehearsed doctrine. Amina's answer came without delay. Then you will meet resistance at every depth and every breath until you turn away. The line cut, and Kelvor felt anger because mercy from prey was unbearable. The second wave began. Heavy ships rolled forward like a wall of sunrise. Their guns charged and their fighters spread. Amina lifted her hand and brought it down. The false targets shifted and masks slid away, opening what looked like a weak seam. The aliens dove toward it, but in the seas below, hidden towers opened and hurled metal rods into the sky. The rod screamed upward, burning the air into fire, and the fire wrapped itself around the wall of ships. Ships tumbled out of formation, and corridors of fire trapped. Their advanced numbers fell. Ships died, but the count still showed thousands waiting. Amina kept her breath steady. She called the next phases. She ordered rescue crews into launch, because she knew Rex would fall and she would not let civilians stand alone. The voice of Earth carried into every ear on every channel. "Hold the line," she said, "one more hour. Then we strike back." The wreckage of the first enemy column still burned, as it fell through the atmosphere, scattering streaks of light across the skies of Earth. The world below did not cower at the sight, but instead drew breath together, as if the planet itself was steadying for the wait to come. In the command ring, Commander Amina Rao stood with her officers and watched the alien fleet shift formations above them. 9,000 ships had been reduced, but the vastness of the number still loomed like a mountain waiting to crush a village. Amina knew the next phase of the battle would test not just machines but human imagination. The aliens regrouped quickly. Their doctrine was ancient and disciplined. They did not believe prey could bleed them twice. Kelvor, the strategist of the 9th Spear, gave orders to spread his armada in layered tiers. Each tier held hunters designed to sweep away decoys and scouts built to strip away camouflage. He believed with enough pressure the truth of Earth's defenses would be forced into the open, and then the fleet would descend to harvest. The confidence of his tone calmed his officers, yet deep inside him, a seed of doubt stirred because the prey had already broken one of his rules, and he knew predators who lost rules often lost more. On the oceans, human submarines moved silently, carrying payloads never meant for open water. In the trenches of the Atlantic lay weapons disguised as research stations. Each held rail batteries wrapped in salt-resistant shells and power drawn from the ocean's endless tides. At Amina's order, they woke and fired lances of iron skyward. The weapons were crude in appearance, yet elegant in effect. Their speed alone tore through enemy shields because physics did not care about empire. The aliens had never prepared for projectiles launched from the deep like whales breaching to strike the stars. Several frigates shattered before their crews understood what had touched them. At the same moment, the upper atmosphere turned alive. Satellites that had once broadcast. Weather now carried new tasks. They spread nets of false signals, weaving a storm of interference that blinded alien targeting systems. Kelvor's fleets saw shadows where no ships existed, and their missiles flew wide, chasing ghosts made of nothing but clever code. In frustration, he unleashed a volley meant to scorch wide areas of orbit, entire squares of space lit with plasma. But when the light faded, the human ships were still hidden, waiting in darkness, like hunters crouched in tall grass among. The hidden fleets was Task Force Kestrel, a formation of small human corvettes hugging the shadow of the moon. Their hulls were painted black with heat, baffles that vented cold streams to keep them invisible. Amina's voice reached them clear. Hold. Until the signal, and they waited, knowing patience was their sharpest blade. The enemy could not see them, and when the moment came, the Kestrel ships leapt from behind the moon. They fired coordinated bursts at alien supply barges, the soft underbelly of the invasion. Within minutes, critical stores of fuel and ammunition were in flames, floating in silence among broken hulls. The victory of Kestrel reached the world net, and shelters filled with cheers. In the Karachi school, Yusuf the nurse listened, with tears in his eyes as the children clapped and sang victory songs even though the battle was still raging. He knew their joy came not from believing the war was won, but from learning that Earth could fight back, and that hope itself was a weapon. Vor's calm mask began to crack. He ordered the release of shock troops and heavy carriers built to descend directly into planetary atmosphere. They would land on cities, seize population centers, and shatter morale. His mind told him that even if the sky was difficult, the ground would break easier because no young world could fight 9,000 ships on land. But Amina had studied this too. She knew the terror of seeing carriers fall like meteors toward homes, and she had prepared an answer. Hidden beneath deserts and mountains lay long silos filled not with nuclear fire, but with kinetic spears. Each spear was a tungsten rod buried deep in earth waiting for the call. At her signal, they launched upward. Guided by rail and magnetic lift, they rose faster than falling stone and slammed into the descending carriers with force so great that even hardened armor split carriers that had promised terror became broken, husks scattering across empty plains before they could release a single soldier. The world watched the feeds of the failed descent, and the cheers this time were mixed with tears of relief, because homes were spared for another hour. Amina stood firm, but inside she felt the pressure of numbers. Each blow they dealt was answered by another wall of steel pressing closer. She knew the next phase would be worse, for the aliens would not stop at probes and carriers. They would try to choke the planet itself. Still she held her ground and spoke through the net. Her words were calm, steady, and human. She said, "We are still here. We are still fighting. Hold with me. One more hour, and when we strike back, it will be for every river, every home, and every child who waits in the shelters." The words carried through comms across the world, through battle groups, and even into the ears of Kelvor, who for the first time in his long career felt the pulse of fear, not for his life, but for his certainty. The orbit above Earth had become a graveyard of broken steel and drifting fire, and yet the sky was still crowded with the weight of alien numbers. Commander Amina Rao did not allow herself to count what was left, for the tally would crush any heart that measured it. Instead, she focused on timing and rhythm, knowing that every strike from Earth had to be part of a larger song of resistance. She stood at the center of the command ring, where maps shifted like restless tides, and she whispered orders that spread across fleets hidden under seas, behind moons, and inside shadows. The aliens regrouped once more. Their doctrine taught them that persistence alone could wear down prey. Kelvor gave orders for a full encirclement. His plan was to seal Earth from every angle, choke its orbit, and cut every chance of counterattack. He believed no young world could breathe beneath that weight. But Earth was not young in spirit. Its people had lived through storms and wars and famine, and they had learned to bend without breaking. From the dark of deep orbit, human fleets began their counterattack. They did not move as the aliens expected, in lines or wedges. They came in tight packs, like hunters circling a larger beast. Each pack had studied weak points in alien formations and struck not at the strongest guns but at the arteries of command and supply. One group darted into the rear of a formation and crippled its communication relays, leaving entire wings blind. Another swarmed fuel depots, turning them into burning stars that scattered wreckage into lanes meant for retreat. The aliens had never faced prey that chose targets with such cold precision, and Kelvor felt his map fracture in ways his doctrine had no word for amid the chaos. A human strike team prepared a different kind of blow. Hidden within a disguised freighter near the outer belt was a small crew led by Captain Elias Ward. Their ship looked broken and harmless, drifting with dead engines, but inside it carried a weapon not of fire but of code. The crew had built a virus shaped to slip through alien networks and twist their targeting commands. Ward waited for the signal, then whispered to his navigator to cut the mask. The freighter lit up for one brief instant, as if begging to be seen, and alien scouts rushed toward it, sensing an easy kill. That was when the virus leapt from antenna to antenna, riding the scans themselves. Within moments, half a dozen ships began to fire at Phantom. Coordinates and their missiles looped back into friendly formations. Ward watched the distant flashes and felt pride, not for destruction, but for proof that the human mind was as dangerous as any weapon. Back on Earth, Yusuf the nurse stood in the shelter with the children, listening to the thunder outside as wreckage fell through atmosphere. The ground shook at times, but the shelter held firm. He told the children that every shake they felt was another sign the invaders were not invincible. He painted the battle with words simple enough for young ears. Ships larger than mountains were falling, he said, and each fall meant Earth was still alive. The children clung to those words as much as to the walls around them. Kelvor raged as reports piled in his fleets were losing control of the battle space. Every time he tried to lock Earth in a ring, human ships broke through with speed and fury. His doctrine had no line for prey that hunted back. He considered retreat, but pride chained him. His empire had promised that Earth would be conquered in days, and to falter now would stain his name forever. He ordered the flagship to push forward into the heart of the fight. Determined to crush the command ring he believed guided this chaos. He did not know that Amina had already planned for his pride. In the command ring, Amina watched the flagship move closer. Its silhouette filled the map like a dark mountain. She turned to her officers and gave the order to prepare the lunar strike. From silos hidden in craters and tunnels under the moon, massive cannons awoke. They had been buried for decades, built in secret against the day humanity might face a force too large for Earth alone. Their barrels aligned in silence, then fired with force that made the lunar dust rise in storms. Beams of energy crossed the void and slammed into the shield of the flagship. It staggered, but did not break yet. Every ship near it reeled as shockwaves tore through formation. The people of Earth saw the flashes as new stars blooming above them. Hope rose again, and this time it was sharp enough to cut fear. Amina's voice carried across channels, steady and unshaken. She said, "They bleed the same as we do, and we are not finished." The words settled into the hearts of fighters and civilians alike. And for the first time, Kelvor's officers looked at their commander with doubt, because the prey they had come to harvest was speaking like a predator, and the battlefield was beginning to believe. Its cislunar space had become the heart of the war. Debris from shattered ships drifted in endless clouds, and every fragment was a danger to anything that passed. The alien fleet tried to carve safe corridors through the wreckage, but humanity had turned the very chaos into a weapon. Every time the enemy cleared a lane, human ships shifted debris with subtle pushes from drones and magnetic tethers, and the cleared path closed again like a wound refusing to heal. Commander Amina Rao understood. That time itself was her ally for the longer the invaders struggled. The stronger human defenses became. The railguns hidden on orbital platforms fired shockwaves that ripped through formations. The blasts did not only tear ships apart but also scattered fragments at such velocity that they became natural minefields. A single strike from a hidden rail battery could transform an entire corridor into a killing zone, and the aliens soon discovered that even silence in orbit was not safety. Kelvor watched in frustration as icons representing his ships blinked out one after another, and he realized that his mighty fleet was fighting not only humans, but the very environment reshaped by their cunning. On Earth, civilians lived with the roar of falling wreckage and streaks of fire in the skies. In one city, the ground quaked as an alien frigate plunged into the ocean, but the people did not scatter. They came out to watch emergency crews rush to the shore, and they sang songs older than the war itself. Songs of rivers and harvests and strength carried across radios and feeds and into shelters. Their voices rose to meet the thunder above, and for the first time the invaders felt they were facing not just armies but an entire world. United rescue flotillas launched from hidden bases behind the moon. They were not warships but armored carriers designed to protect civilians who had been caught in orbital habitats or stranded on mining stations. Pilots risked everything to fly into burning fields of debris to bring their people home. The feed showed one such flotilla as it pulled survivors from a damaged habitat near Mars orbit. The image of a small child being lifted aboard became a beacon across every human channel, proving that the war was not only about survival but also about compassion. Even in the midst of destruction, humanity was saving its own. Kelvor watched the footage with cold eyes and told himself it was weakness to value the lives of the small. Yet deep inside he envied it, for his empire taught only obedience and fear. While these humans found strength in protecting one another, he turned his anger into orders, commanding his fleet to cut deeper into the inner system and burn away every refuge. Humanity must see only fire, he told his subcommanders. But Amina had anticipated such fury. She unleashed the second wave of orbital traps hidden in asteroids that had been towed quietly over years of preparation. At her command, they split open and released swarms of drones. Each drone was small and cheap, yet fast and relentless. Together they formed walls that funneled enemy ships into narrow corridors where railguns and missile batteries waited. The battle shifted into a deadly rhythm. Every time the aliens pushed forward, they found themselves herded into fields of fire. Every time they tried to retreat, they discovered debris and mines blocking their path. Their numerical advantage was slowly being turned into a cage. In the command ring, Amina stood silent as her officers reported victories. She did not smile, for she knew the cost of every strike. She thought of Yusuf in the shelter and of children singing beneath the rumble of battle. and she promised herself she would not fail them among the alien fleet. Despair began to spread. Officers whispered doubts for the first time. They had never imagined prey that could build such layered traps, nor prey that refused to break. Under fear, Kelvor barked commands, but he could feel the tension rising like heat in a sealed room. He considered withdrawing to regroup, yet pride kept him bound. He wanted to see Earth burn with his own eyes, and believed one final overwhelming strike could break the defenders. He did not realize that the more he pressed the tighter, Amina's noose grew as another wave of alien ships crumbled under coordinated strikes. Earth's defenders lifted their voices in unity, not just in commands, but in chants and prayers and music broadcast into the void. The sound of humanity reached across the battlefield, and even through static, it carried strength. The invaders who heard it did not understand the words, but they felt the defiance and the weight of hearts that refused to kneel. Amina listened too, and for the first time since the battle began, she let herself feel the hope rising. She knew the storm was far from over, yet she also knew the tide was turning. Humanity was bleeding, but it was bleeding forward, and in every drop there was steel. The alien fleet had been cut and scattered in cislunar space, yet Kelvor refused to yield. He ordered the deployment of terror, dropships, massive carriers designed to descend through atmosphere and unleash thousands of shock troops on the cities of Earth. The strategy was simple: break the will of the civilians by placing fire in their homes and fear in their hearts. If the armies above could not conquer, then the cries of children below surely would. But Earth had prepared for such nightmares long before the first ship appeared in the sky. In every nation, militia networks that had trained in secret came alive. Old tunnels that once served as subways became arsenals. Streets, filled not with panic but with barricades and volunteer fighters. Doctors, nurses, and engineers moved into position alongside soldiers because Earth understood that wars are not only won with guns, but also with courage and care. In Karachi, Yusuf, the nurse, guided families into deeper shelters. He handed out masks, water, and small words of comfort, and though his hands trembled, he never let the children see his fear. The first of the alien carriers tore through the atmosphere like a falling star. Its armored shell blazed against the air, but as it neared the surface, a hidden defense woke towers disguised as skyscrapers opened their sides and revealed rail cannons that spat tungsten spears upward. The spears punched through armor, and the carrier broke apart over empty fields, scattering wreckage across the land before it could reach the city. The people in shelters heard the roar and braced for fire. Yet when silence returned, it was the sound of survival, not of loss. Not every carrier fell to railguns. Some slipped through the gauntlet and dropped pods of troops into remote regions. But here, humanity's unity became the greatest weapon. Villages armed with little more than drones. Tractors and old rifles resisted with fierce determination. Children carried messages through tunnels while elders guided fighters with maps of hills and rivers that no alien could understand. Entire communities moved like single living organisms, refusing to give ground and buying time for regular forces to arrive. The invaders had expected terror and collapse. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by defiance in every direction, high above the planet. Commander Amina Rao prepared a different strike. She had authorized a mission so dangerous it bordered on impossible. A small human team was to infiltrate the enemy flagship itself and cut the brain from the serpent. Their ship, the Dauntless, was painted black and carried stealth plating scavenged from experiments, never meant for battle. On board, Captain Elias Ward and his crew readied themselves with calm, grim focus. They knew the flagship carried enough weapons to end continents, but they also knew a single breach of its command network could shatter the invaders' coordination. The Dauntless slipped into the debris field around the flagship, hiding among broken hulls and drifting fire. When the enemy scanned the wreckage, they saw nothing but corpses of their own ships, and did not notice the living. Blade moving closer inside, the human crew whispered to one another, not with fear but with promises of what waited at home. Families, lovers, children. They carried Earth itself in their hearts, and it gave them strength. The docking clamps bit into the flagship hull, and the team entered corridors filled with alien steel. Kelvor felt a tremor of unease even before alarms sounded. He watched his screens flicker and twist as strange signals spread across his network. He barked orders to isolate the disturbance, but it was too late. The humans had planted their code deep within his systems, and suddenly his fleet began to stagger as commands were delayed or scrambled. Ships fired into empty void or collided in confusion. His mighty wall was crumbling from the inside, and for the first time his officers looked at him not with obedience but with doubt. On Earth, Yusuf held the hand of a child who asked if the sky was falling. He smiled, though his heart ached, and said, "The sky is fighting for us, not against us." The words steadied the room, and when the next explosion sounded above, it was not fear but determination that filled the shelter. The people of Earth were learning that their strength was not only in weapons but also in spirit. The aliens had come to spread terror, yet every hour of resistance only bound humanity tighter together. As the dauntless team pressed deeper into the flagship, and as militias across the world held firm against dropships, Amina gave a single command across every channel. She said, "Hold one more hour, just one more hour, and the line will break." The message was heard by soldiers in orbit, by families in shelters, and by aliens who realized with dread that prey should never speak with such certainty. For the battle was no longer only about survival. Humanity was no longer defending, humanity was preparing to strike back. The sky above Earth had become a furnace of broken steel and fire. Trails of burning ships stretched across the atmosphere like scars, and still the alien fleet pressed forward, though their once perfect formations were now scattered and bleeding. Commander Amina Rao stood in the command ring with her eyes fixed on the shifting maps. Each icon that vanished carried lives with it, but each enemy ship that burned meant one step closer to survival. She knew the moment was coming when the balance would finally tip, deep inside the alien flagship. Alarms screamed. Kelvor slammed his claws against the console as reports poured in. His fleet was unraveling. Communications were failing. Coordination was crumbling, and whole wings of his armada were firing on false targets or colliding in blind confusion. He had underestimated the humans, and now the word improvisation haunted him like a curse. He shouted for his officers to regroup and strike with overwhelming force, but his orders reached only fragments of the fleet. Many captains were already fighting for their own survival, and some no longer trusted the signals from command. On the hull of the flagship, the Dauntless clung like a shadow. Captain Elias Ward and his team moved through alien corridors with rifles ready. Their virus had already done its work, but they needed to push deeper to ensure the flagship remained blind. They passed through halls lit by red warning lights and the echoes of alien voices shouting in panic. Each step was a race against discovery, yet they moved with the certainty of those who knew their cause was greater than their lives. At the core, they planted the second strike, a device built, not to destroy, but to shut the heart of the ship's coordination for good. While chaos spread in the flagship, Earth's fleets moved to close the trap. From hidden bases behind the moon, squadrons of human corvettes and destroyers surged forward. They did not aim to meet the enemy in a grand duel of fleets, but to push them into corridors of wreckage and minefields. Every passage became a funnel, every open lane a dead end. The invaders had thought numbers would be their strength, but now their sheer mass became chains around them. Each ship destroyed scattered more debris, and each cloud of debris blocked more retreat. On the planet's surface, militias still fought against the scattered dropships. Entire towns became fortresses. Families carried supplies to the front, and children carried messages through tunnels. In one valley, a column of alien troops advanced expecting quick victory, but they found themselves ambushed by farmers who had turned irrigation pumps into flamethrowers, and miners who knew every rock of their land. The battle lasted hours, and when the sun rose, the valley still belonged to Earth. The invaders learned that they were not fighting soldiers alone, but a people who had turned survival into defiance. Yusuf, the nurse, continued his work in the Karachi shelter. He treated wounds from falling debris and soothed frightened voices. But even as he worked, he listened to the broadcasts from orbit. He heard Amina's calm voice telling the world that the tide was shifting. He repeated her words to the children around him and saw their eyes brighten with courage. They no longer asked if Earth would survive. They asked when Earth would win. Kelvor felt his empire slipping through his claws. He demanded, Reports from the ground only to hear of dropships destroyed and troops cut off. He demanded updates from the fleet only to see his once flawless armada trapped in a cage of human design. His officers began to whisper of retreat, but pride still bound him. He refused to imagine returning home defeated by prey. His rage burned hotter than the fires around him, yet even rage could not clear the virus that twisted his commands, nor the minds that blocked his paths. Samina knew the moment had come. She stood tall in the command ring and ordered every fleet, every platform, and every hidden weapon to strike at once. The trap closed with brutal precision. Human ships fired from every angle, debris fields turned into storms of shrapnel and orbital. Guns lit space with rivers of fire. Alien ships that tried to flee slammed into mines, while those that tried to fight back found themselves outnumbered in the corridors. Earth had chosen. Humanity was no longer reacting. Humanity was dictating the shape of the battle. The invaders had come with 9,900 ships and the promise of certain conquest. Now their numbers dwindled with every passing minute. Each explosion was a reminder that arrogance had blinded them, and that Earth was not a world to be harvested but a world that fought with teeth of steel and hearts unyielding. Kelvor stood on the bridge of his failing flagship, staring at the blue planet below, and for the first time in his long career, he felt the cold truth of fear. Not fear of death, but fear that history itself would remember him as the predator who became prey in shelters across the world. People listened to the news of victory growing with each hour. Yusuf smiled through exhaustion and told the children that the storm was breaking. Above them, Amina whispered to herself the same promise she had carried since the first light appeared. Hold the line one more hour, and soon it will be over. Humanity was no longer surviving. Humanity was winning, and the invaders who once thought themselves eternal were now watching their empire unravel piece by piece. The battlefield above Earth was no longer a place of order, but a sea of fire and drifting ruin. The once perfect armada of 9,900 ships now lay broken with only fragments still holding formation. Commander Amina Rao stood in the command ring with her officers around her, and she knew the time had come for the final strike. The enemy had been weakened by traps and cut apart by human ingenuity, but to end the invasion completely, they had to shatter what remained of the flagship. The beast still lived, though its body was bleeding. Inside the flagship, Kelvor gripped the rail of his command platform with claws that trembled. His fleet was failing around him. The virus planted by the human infiltrators twisted every order into confusion, and his officers no longer met his eyes with certainty. Some demanded retreat, while others begged for direction. But he could hear doubt in every voice. He thought of the promises he had made to his empire that Earth would fall in days, that humanity would kneel. And now those words were chains around his neck. He refused to accept defeat, even as defeat closed its jaws. The Dauntless team moved through the core of the flagship. Captain Elias Ward led them deeper toward the heart of alien command systems. Their mission had already crippled the ship, but now they sought to finish it. Ward planted the final charge against the central relay that bound the flagship to the rest of the fleet. The device was small, yet its effect would be vast. Once triggered, it would cut the flagship's nerve and leave the alien fleet a headless serpent. Ward spoke to his crew, with quiet pride, telling them that whatever happened, their names would be carried home in victory. They nodded with resolve, knowing this was the path they had chosen. Above the moon, human fleets gathered for the last push. Amina gave the order, and her voice carried like a steady drumbeat. Strike as one. Every railgun, every missile battery, every fighter launched in a wave that looked like a storm of stars crashing into the last bastion of the invaders. The sky lit brighter than dawn as human firepower poured across the void. Alien shields cracked and hulls broke apart. Ships collided in panic, trying to flee, only to be caught in mines or torn apart by rail slugs. The great fleet that had come with arrogance was now nothing more than scattered fragments clinging to survival. On Earth, militias and civilians alike felt the tremors as wreckage rained down from orbit. The people did not hide. Instead, they came out to watch the skies where flames burned across the heavens like falling meteors. Yusuf stood outside the shelter with children clustered around him, and he pointed upward. telling them that each streak was not the end of Earth, but the end of those who had tried to take it from them. The children cheered, and their voices rose like another weapon joining the battle. Inside the flagship, Kelvor felt the moment of collapse. The dauntless charge detonated, and the central relay went dark. His commands died in his throat as screens flickered to nothing. The flagship groaned, under the assault from outside railguns and missiles hammering at its hull. He stared at the blue world below, and for the first time he saw it not as prey, but as a force greater than his empire. A world that refused chains. A world that fought with unity and cunning. He whispered a curse, then an admission that his kind would never forget. These humans are not prey. They are predators. The flagship split apart under the storm of fire. Captain Ward and his crew fought to reach their ship as flames tore through the corridors. They made it to the docking clamps and launched free just as the colossal vessel erupted in a burst that lit the battlefield like a sun. The explosion marked the end of the invasion. The remaining alien ships broke and fled desperate to escape the cage Earth had built. Few would ever see home again, and those who did would carry the tale of terror and defeat in the command ring. Silence fell as the last hostile icon vanished. Amina Rao closed her eyes and allowed herself a single deep breath. She thought of the billions she had sworn to protect, and she thought of every fighter who had given their life to hold the line. She opened her eyes and gave the only words the world needed to hear. Earth stands. The message spread across every channel. Civilians poured into the streets singing. Soldiers embraced one another. Families wept in relief and joy. Yusuf lifted the children onto his shoulders and told them to remember this day, not for the fire or the fear, but for the unity that had carried them through. The people of Earth had faced the storm, and they had not bent. Only a handful of enemy ships escaped to tell the tale. They would carry the story of a small blue world that had stood against overwhelming force and turned hunters into prey. Across the galaxy, the legend would spread, whispered first with disbelief and then with fear. They sent 9,900 ships to conquer Earth, and only a few lived to return. Humanity had bled, but in its defiance it had proven a truth no empire could erase. Earth was not a world to be harvested. It was a world to be respected, a world to be feared. The remnants of the alien fleet fled into the void, leaving behind nothing but twisted metal and silence above a battered Earth. Amina Rao walked across the command deck, her boots echoing on steel floors as the weight of victory settled on her shoulders. The sky outside the viewport was filled with fire trails of destroyed ships, and the first hints of dawn breaking across the horizon. She could see the ocean shimmering and the continents scarred yet alive. The people below had survived the impossible. They had stood when all odds were against them, and now the world itself seemed to breathe in relief. Across the globe, celebrations erupted in cities and villages alike. Humanity's spirit had not only endured, it had surged forward stronger and fiercer than ever before. Children ran through the streets laughing and crying. At the same time, elders wept quietly, remembering friends and family lost in the battle, yet knowing their sacrifice had shaped the future. Scientists, engineers, pilots, and soldiers all came together to rebuild and to honor those who had fallen, while the survivors shared stories that would become legends, whispered to each generation of humans who would grow up knowing the price of freedom. Captain Elias Ward stood beside Amina, looking at the stars that had once brought terror, now dotted with the smoldering remains of the invaders. His team had survived through courage and precision, but also through the stubbornness of humanity refusing to yield. He thought of each member of his crew, every life that had fought so fiercely, and he felt a swelling pride knowing their actions had carved a name for Earth into the chronicles of the galaxy. No alien would forget that humans were not weak, fragile creatures to be underestimated. They were clever, strong, relentless. On the far side of the planet, Yusuf led the children in a game imitating the battles that had raged overhead. They used sticks and stones as their weapons and shouted orders to invisible fleets. Yet every laugh was infused with the pride of knowing that their world had been defended. They did not understand all the politics or technology, yet they understood courage and heart. They would grow up with stories of how their ancestors had faced annihilation and had turned it into a triumph that no invader could erase. Even in the shadows of the fallen alien warships, there was a strange beauty. As engineers and explorers studied the wreckage, learning from it, repurposing it, Earth had gained weapons knowledge, technology, and above all respect, in a universe that had not taken it seriously before. Every sensor, every blueprint, every survivor's tale would serve as a warning to those who thought to strike humanity again. The galaxy would remember the day Earth refused. Amina stood on the highest tower overlooking the capital city as the sun rose, fully illuminating ruins and rebuilt structures alike. She took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of humanity in every sound, every movement below. Humans were alive, and they were unbroken. The war had left scars, yet those scars were a testament to survival and a promise that humanity would rise higher, stronger, and united. No force could shatter the will of the people. Messages poured in from all corners of Earth, reporting remaining alien scouts captured or destroyed, alliances with former foes forged in shared victory, and new initiatives to ensure Earth would never be threatened in such a way again. Scientists discussed fleet expansions, defenses, and interstellar communication, while children painted murals and wrote songs about the day the stars rained fire and humans stood undaunted. Every life mattered, every contribution counted, every heartbeat was part of the victory. The few surviving alien commanders would return to their empires with tales of a planet that laughed in the face of extinction, a planet that turned hunters into prey, a planet that would forever be a symbol of what cunning, courage, and the relentless spirit of a single species could achieve. They would tell their leaders never to underestimate humans, never to believe victory was certain, for even the smallest creatures could become the most formidable warriors when their backs were against the wall. And on Earth, humanity looked up at the stars, knowing they had earned their place among them. They had faced annihilation and had not only survived, but had thrived. They had turned fear into strength and despair into hope. The people who had once feared the darkness now commanded it with their will and ingenuity. Every heart beat with pride, and every mind swore to protect the world that had proven to the universe that humans were not to be conquered. The galaxy had witnessed the impossible, and Earth had become legend and promise all in one. The humans who lived would rebuild, teach, and prepare for the future, and those who had fallen would be remembered in stories and monuments across continents. The people of Earth had shown that no matter the threat, no matter the enemy, the spirit of humanity could not be broken. They sent 9,900 ships to conquer Earth, and only a few lived to tell the tale. Humanity had bled. Humanity had fought. But humanity had prevailed. The stars themselves had bowed to the courage and will of a single planet and its people. Earth was alive, and it would never kneel. The end.